There's a saying, never try to teach a pig to sing. It's a waste of your time, and it annoys the pig. Coming to you from deep in the hood, this is the Eurasian Century. And so it is Super Bowl Sunday, and all types of things are happening in the world. And we've got Biden seems to be melting down, and uh, at the same time, it seems like internationally things are not looking good for the American empire. And into the middle of this, we have Tucker Carlson comes, and he does an interview with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. It's over 2 hours long, and there's a I don't know exactly 20 or 30 minute history lesson that kicks it off, where Tucker wanted to ask him directly, why did you invade Ukraine? And uh, Putin basically recounted the history of the Eastern Slavs from sometime in the 9th century to the present. Uh, Now, this stands in distinct contrast to the mental capacity of our current president, who I think was shortly after the video was dropped, did a press conference in order to defend himself from a report by special counsel on the classified documents situation. And first of all, it's much more serious with Biden than it was with Trump. The Trump thing was mostly contrived because it was all stuff that happened when he was president or after he had been president. This was all stuff that they were investigating that happened before Biden was president. The whole authority to classify or declassify stems from the executive. The president who's elected, that's part of his executive powers. So with Trump, it was mostly BS. With Biden, I still think, I mean, the special counsel said that he um, maybe committed a couple of felonies, but they're not going to prosecute because, in so many words, he said he's incompetent to stand trial uh, because of senility. And he gave a few examples in his report of not being able to remember various and sundry things. And I don't really feel sorry for Joe Biden, but I think his people probably are much more blameworthy, or as blameworthy as he is. I mean, yeah, he's a corrupt thug, but it's elder abuse to keep him in there. Anyway, so he came out to defend himself, and he couldn't remember. He confused Mexico and Egypt, and uh, he didn't do himself any favors. While Putin can just rattle off history over hundreds and hundreds of years without any notes, just from memory. People forget that Putin's both a lawyer and has a doctorate in economics, and he's probably the brightest world leader out there for a while. So anyway, so if you were interested in speaking at length to the American people, would you start out with a half-hour history lecture? Um, Now it's noteworthy that Twitter X is a worldwide platform, but Twitter X, I think, is still largely blocked in Russia, and so the interview was circulated through other means within the Russian Federation. And so it may be that Elon's motivation for having Tucker posted on Twitter X was access to the Russian market. But of course, it's very popular, so that also helps Musk's Twitter X, because last I heard it was over 150 million views on it. Um, Putin came across as knowledgeable, somewhat academic. Um, I fast forwarded through 20 minutes of it just because I know the history and I don't need to be lectured about it. Tucker does not know much at all about Russia, apparently. And that's why I think part of it was that Tucker, probably from speaking with Putin beforehand, and also given his leading question of so why did you invade Ukraine? Um, I don't, Tucker doesn't really he didn't understand where he was and what was happening to him. He was clearly in over his head. And I give Tucker Carlson kudos for going over there and taking heat and all that. And he's not a bad representative of what you might call the right wing resistance in the United States. But he's very limited by that too, uh, parochial to the United States, um, and so um, he felt obliged to, and I understand why he did this, to take a somewhat adversarial tone, um, moderately adversarial with Putin, and Putin parried this in different ways, which are annoying to Carlson. Which was the intent? he, when he brought up the whole thing about Carlson having, he didn't go into detail in the interview, but Carlson evidently had wanted to go into the CIA or applied to the CIA at some point, and they turned him down. And Putin rattled his cage about it a little bit, or tugged his chain a little bit about it, because Putin, of course, was in the KGB and later on directed the FSB. It's a successor to the KGB, one of the successor institutions to it. Um, Now, I'm not really going to get into a lot of the content of the uh, interview because it's all stuff that we've gone over in this program, different programs that I've done, and most of the people who watch the show uh, knew a lot of the stuff about NATO pushing ever eastward, the guarantees that were made to Russia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, or even before that, actually, when the Berlin Wall came down, um, and the friction that was generated, and the coup d'état in the Ukraine, and the persecution of Russians in the Donbass. I mean, I think the people who watch this all know about that. I mean, I'm doing this. I originally wasn't going to do one on the interview, but I thought, well, you got a channel that's called Eurasian Century. You probably ought to do something, on it. And so, I started thinking about what was going on here because Tucker's. Tucker Carlson, I'm going to refer to him as Tucker. His purpose was fairly clear. Um, he wanted to do the interview. He's a reporter. He wants to be perceived as being incisive. He's trying to make a career after Fox. He has the Tucker Carlson network, and he's got a arrangement with Twitter X with Elon Musk, and he wants people to see his shows, and one way to be edgy, is to interview Vladimir Putin during this war. Now, I don't think he Americans. Let me digress for just a second. Americans tend to be very parochial about world affairs. Um, Probably that doesn't apply so much to the people who are watching this. However, um, most Americans really don't pay much attention to what happens beyond the borders of the United States. Um, and they're aware of certain things. Most of them don't know where Ukraine is, have a vague idea of where Russia is. Um, and they just, all that's annoying. They're really concerned about what happens to them here in America. And that's, natural. That's normal. But Tucker, he's not totally in that camp, but he didn't know uh, where he was. He was in what is arguably the next capital of the world, talking to someone who's more powerful than any king or emperor has ever been in the history of humanity. Um, Putin controls a country that takes up 1/6 of the landmass of Earth and has a larger nuclear stockpile than any other country. And he runs it as a team with people that are referred to in Russian as siloviki, the powerful ones, I guess you could say, um, and with the Duma, and with the legislature. But he's firmly in charge, Now, he kind of put Tucker in his place to some extent. Um, but he was very patient with Tucker as well, um, because he knew that Tucker wasn't really out to get him, that he just had to appear, that he was not a lapdog for him. And so Tucker let him, talk at length about whatever he wanted to, basically. Only once he seemed like he got a little impatient with him. But at the same time, I don't think there's any doubt that Putin was trying to reach American viewers and an American audience of the government and elites. Um, I'm not sure that was his primary focus, though. Putin's running for president again in March, and the better the margin that he wins by, um, the better his international standing through the eyes of people who will think, oh, the Russians are totally in support of what Putin's doing, not only internally but also the war in Ukraine, and that's largely true. Um, but that too is not, I don't think, the real target audience. Um, Another target audience would be the global South, China, Iran, Africa, Latin America. China's not really part of the global South, but I'm sure he was playing to the Chinese as well. Um, as far as the Russians, what better way to rally the Russians than to allow Tucker to interview him? Putin looks like he's in demand by the West, continues to stick it to the Western elite. Putin is appealing to the American everyman. Look at how the Western elite are lying and abusing us in reaction to this interview by one of their own journalists, that type of thing. And that had played pretty well in the Russosphere, and a lot of hay has been made out of it in the Russosphere. They're playing it up pretty well, but also in the global South, you have the angle that people in developing societies have longer attention spans than we in America and the West do, and um, would be expected to actually listen to what Putin said about the history and identify with the tribalism that comes out of that, where he talks about the Eastern Slavs as one unity, Rus, um, and the threat to that from Western liberalism, basically. Especially the global South leadership and the upper classes, um, that would particularly appeal to them, but also the lower classes who are thinking about, for example, revolution in Africa to throw off colonialism. Well, they can identify with that. And it's being disseminated widely in many languages. I lost count of how many I saw on YouTube and other media, um, with subtitles and overdubs and whatever in different languages. Um, it's a PR tour de force in Russia, China, Iran, um, and the global South. All these people can identify with the maltreatment that Putin alleges from the West, with respect to Russia. Now, about an hour and 13 minutes in, he explains it all, though, when he states that America controls the world media. He said that in response to Tucker saying something like, well, if you asked him about Nord Stream, who blew it up, and he said you did, and it's like I have an alibi, and they laughed, and he said, I mean, the CIA, and Tucker said, well, if you have evidence of that, uh, why don't you show it to the world, because that would be a great PR, propaganda victory. And Putin replied, well, it's difficult to win propaganda points against the West when America controls the world media. I thought that was interesting because he could have easily said, why do you think I'm talking to you, Tucker? uh, Western media has its tentacles every place on Earth, and uh, X and Twitter and Tucker are hip deep in what he's a kind of a resistance figure, but this thing is being played every place. Um, and so, but there's one particular audience that I'm sure Putin was targeting, and that is the European Union viewership. There are a host of elections at play in Europe this year, including elections for the European Parliament. Already sirens are being sounded about the rise of right-wing coalitions, and the amount of power that they might um, possess at the end of the process if they're victorious. And they're gaining in the polls, and I'm talking about Le Pen the factions that are led by Le Pen in France, AfD in Germany, and other places, the Maloney's part of that family of coalitions in the European Parliament. Law and Justice in Poland, I think, are as well. And they've all been meeting sporadically with each other and a few times all together. And it seems like that they're going to be a substantial force in the next European Parliament. Um, and part of the power they might yield would be to make Russia's life easier. Um, Europe is suffering severely from the sanctions regime that's been imposed upon Russia, which is backfiring spectacularly. Germany is in recession, and the rest of Europe may well be following it. It's started to cause political instability throughout the continent, really. There have been governments that have fallen and been overtaken by different parties. Um, the rise in oil and gas prices has driven inflation in all areas and caused German deindustrialization. Um, so, assuming Russian constancy that they're not going to change their policy regarding Ukraine and the relationship with Europe so that the sanctions might be lifted. The only answer to alleviating this building pressure is political change within the European Union. And Putin's message, his human face, his willingness to be reasonable, stands in stark contrast to the characters running European Union politics at the moment. Putin, you see, is also on the ballot in the European Union through the National Front in France, AfD in Germany, and these other parties that, through any rising political force that might lift sanctions and resume the full, unrestrained import of Russian energy. It's not that Russia needs this. Russia has found willing buyers in China, India, and elsewhere. Europe needs it, and Putin knows it, and that's the point. It's not charity or altruism. Full resumption of energy commerce will demonstrate the political force of European dependence on Russia. The European Union nations are currently American satellites or vassals. I think Putin referred to them as satellites in the interview. The question is, whose vassals will the European Union nations become? But the whole exercise begs the question, really, as I started off the program with, why cast pearls before swine? Why bother with this whole thing? Russia, and more broadly the Eurasian Alliance, is winning. Tucker Carlson comes in as a Westerner, completely immersed in Western elite culture, reacting and rebelling to one facet of it, the uniparty control and all the deception and lying, what Putin has called the empire of lies, but still captivated by its paradigms and trying to ask challenging questions to satisfy Western sensibilities. That is, that Tucker is asking. Putin, on the other hand, is sitting on top of the world without care one at this point, despite the fact that there's a shooting war going on in Ukraine. He lacks any concern because he has used his opponent's weight against them and let the conflict serve as an impetus to invigorate Russia's military and military industrial complex, which is government owned and controlled. Far from being weakened, his economy rebounded from the initial sanctions much quicker than anyone anticipated and has resumed impressive growth even as Europe sinks. The Europeans were actually mad at the IMF for being frank about how quickly Russia rebounded and the growth that they're experiencing right now. He has a solid alliance, Putin and Russia do have a solid alliance with the world's premier economic power, that is China, and simply doesn't need the United States or the West for any reason, nor does he need anyone in the West for any reason. Tucker came to him. He didn't go to Tucker. And if the West wants to end the conflict, they will come to Putin as well. If not, he's indifferent and will proceed accordingly to advance the interests of Russia and the Eurasian alliance around the world. And while America is an adversary, that means advancing against the interests of the United States. Putin is not war weary in the least. He is just getting started. If you find this program valuable, please hit like and subscribe. I am going to be doing these less frequently, fewer and further between. I'm going to start teaching part-time again, trying to save up some money to move. And so I'm not sure. We might be talking bi-weekly. We might be talking monthly. It just depends. I think if you subscribe, then you get a notice for when these things come out. And it'll be more ad hoc. I've got something that on the back burner that I've had cooking for a while about Christendom in general. And I haven't thought it all the way through yet. I've got enough really for 2 programs on it. But the thing that I'm getting stuck on is that perpetual question, political question, что делать, what to do. That's the part of the program, the practical advice for someone who is an Orthodox Christian believer or a classical conservative or whatever groups that overlap that watch this kind of program, what people like us can do as a practical matter on a day-to-day basis, organizing our lives. I'm not telling you how to live or anything like that, just suggesting things you might want to consider. That's what's actually I have to think about that long and hard before I put that down, as in, well, Misha says this, let's be sure that Misha wants to say that. So anyway, like I said, please hit like and subscribe, and thank you, and see you next time.